Eric, in 2012, you wrote an article for NYFA.edu, and you say, I don't watch a movie with a notebook or a pen light. I go to the theater simply to be transported. How is this nowadays when it's become sort of in fashion to be a Monday morning quarterback or critic?
You know, I think to that end, as you put it, Monday morning quarterback means, it's after the game, you're home, and that's okay. I have no qualms with, some of Reddit is terrifying, but there's also something to be said for like passion, and how many shows, for instance, survived because of the passion of their fans, and the terms like fan service comes up a lot, right? The idea of like, are you pandering to your fans? It's like, well, the truth is like, if you're making a big film, let's say the Marvel films, Star Wars universe, whatever it may be, you're gonna have to get a lot of people to buy a lot of tickets because it costs a lot of money to make those films. And so for me, something I actually really do encourage my students, particularly if they're newer, like if they weren't really writing before, if they're just trying this for the first time, I caution them, like, maybe don't be that guy. And when I say that guy, the dude in sort of like the comic book store guy in The Simpsons, well, I thought Act 2 was a little bit dry. It lagged a little bit at the midpoint. It's like, okay, like we get it. And you're welcome to have those takes and go and God bless. But the truth is, like, if you're paying to see a movie, even if you have the A-list, right? And it doesn't feel like paying, even though it is paying every month at AMC, right? In the end of the day, like, you do want to get kind of lost in the theater. So, if you're a film critic, sure. Yeah, you should probably have that pen going with the little light at the end so you don't bother anyone. But otherwise, I think there is something to be said for just allowing yourself to get a little lost in the story. And maybe not coming at it with knives out. Maybe come at it with like, okay, what is this story trying to do? And, depending on the genre, depending on the style, the budget, indie film or a tentpole that needs the quote unquote 4 quadrants, right? Young, old, male, female. Well, the truth is, like, in the end of the day, what are they trying to do? Why'd you go see the film? And so if you sit there and you, try to Monday morning quarterback on a Sunday afternoon in the middle of the game, I feel like it might get in the way of something, allowing yourself to truly experience the film. And to me, even all these years in, there's something really special for me when I can watch a movie, my phone is away, turned off, the dogs aren't barking, my kids don't need a ride. There's something kind of lovely. I saw The Brutalist. That thing is almost 4 hours long. And, mesmerized pretty much the whole film, and being able to get lost in the story, lost in the world. And even movies I see in the theaters that aren't quite so good. And I see plenty of stinkers, but there's something to be said for even those. They're trying, right? Someone cared about this. Someone believed in it enough to put money into it and try. So yeah, that's, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, I definitely break down movies in my classes. I definitely break down movies when I'm working on a script. But in the end of it all, like, what is it in the end of it all? What is it? With like 1 or 2 sentences. Why am I writing this? Why are we developing this? What is a writer in our classes trying to do? What is their goal with it? And how do you get there? And that's the same experience as being a spectator.
You also said in the article that you sometimes warn your students to refrain from becoming, quote, that guy or that gal, who is very critical, and especially in the light of it being in fashion to bash movies. Do you think it's harder for people once they learn kind of how the sausage is made to not become that person?
It's such a great point, right? It's like especially like you're learning it and working at it. And our students, I always say, even the student who doesn't work the hardest is working incredibly hard. Like the curriculum's really full. They do a lot of material here. And so you're right. It's like once you know how the sausage gets made, it's hard to just taste it without knowing what's in that thing. It's why I never choose to find out how a hot dog is made. Because I want to still be able to enjoy a Dodger dog every now and again. Not too many. I'm trying to, But I think part of this is like, okay, If you're watching a film as a critic, it is a different kind of thing, right? It means you are breaking down. Now, I think there's real value in studying a film. Let's say you're writing a thriller, and you want to do a thriller like one of the Denzel Washington, Tony Scott films, like Man on Fire or Equalizer, one of those, then yeah, you should look at that model. You should, the metaphor I always go to is, although I have an Apple Watch, is you take apart a watch so you learn how to put it back together. And I think there's incredible value in that. But when you're an audience member and you're seeing it for the first time, I'm not sure if that's the time to do that. I think you said Monday morning quarterback, like, yeah, maybe wait till Monday, heck, wait till Wednesday. Wait until halfway through the week and then sort of take a look at it. But maybe when you're in the theater, just watch it, enjoy it. I also warn my students, in LA, you never know who worked on a film. So I have a rule with my own sons who are both teenagers. I always say, like, whatever their thoughts are, if they love it, great. But if they don't, that's okay, and we'll talk about it, but let's wait until we get in the car, because that person behind you could have been a makeup artist on it. Person next to you might have done sound design. Person in front of you might have been an intern. And even if they only worked on it for like 2 days, and they had a miserable experience, there is something important about, like, well, your name's in there, and so thus it is a reflection of you. And so I think that's a part of the caution about not being that guy or that girl, that woman, that man, is also, like, understand you're in a company town, and people have worked on these films and put a lot of themselves into these films, no matter where they are on the call sheet. And so I think part of it too is there's a respect factor as well that sometimes people forget about. Sometimes even a friend told me they were at a screening that had, I want to say, like, it might have been David Lynch was in there, and literally could hear someone say, well, that wasn't one of his best. And they knew he was there. It was a Q&A, and it's like, really? So I think there is value in breaking down films. You need to. You really need to see what makes formulas work so that you can also create your own version of that formula. Doesn't mean you copy it, but it means, like, okay, this is how they pulled it off. How am I going to pull mine off now? Like, if there was one that didn't work so well, maybe what's a pothole they fell into that you want to avoid?
One of the classes that you're teaching here at NYFA is story generation. Are there proven strategies that help writers come up with ideas?
One thing I encourage, that we were just talking a moment ago about breaking down other stories. You watch a film, figure out how they put it together. Story generation, I think so much of this is, I will try to ask a lot of questions that aren't necessarily about film or TV. What music do you like? What books have you read? We even do in that class something that's really quite fun. We do a field trip to one of the museums, either LACMA or Broad, or the Getty. And this idea of allowing yourself to be open to inspiration. During the first class, I even have this list I found somewhere online of movies that you can't imagine were made out of different material. So it wasn't a great film, sorry, but the Emoji Movie. Right, what is that? It's a symbol on a phone. They made a movie out of that. But sometimes it could be really inspired. Mean Girls, which was an adaptation Tina Fey did of, I think it's called Queen Bees and Wannabes, which is a nonfiction guide for, I think it's mostly for mothers raising teenage girls. And it's a very good read, by the way, the original manual. But what Tina Fey was able to do was, how do you keep the sort of emotion of that, the real worldness of that, and then find a fictional story, fictional characters to inhabit that space? And so I think a big part of story generation is, like, ideas can come from so many places. Go to a coffee shop and just listen. Don't eavesdrop, don't be creepy or weird. And trust me, I warn them of that. As I told them, I'm like, I'm not bailing you all out of jail, but just look around. LA is an incredibly funky place, just like New York City. I once saw someone driving a harp in the middle of New York City. And the funniest part was how few of us actually reacted. It's like, oh yeah, it's someone riding a harp. Because it's New York, and why not? Or seeing two Santa Clauses get into a fist fight, during SantaCon or one of those back in the day. So I think part of this is eyes open, allow yourself to see things around you, but then also go back a step. Like, think even when you were young, what inspired you? You know, like what was it that made you want to create? And sometimes it was just, you know, you got the big box of Crayola and that was enough. It's like, wow, I have all these tools now I can use. But then also too, like, you know, there's almost like a purity to story generation. Like I try not to be too mechanical about it, you know, because I think like what we really want students to do, and that's a first semester class, is really just allow lots of possibilities to come to the surface. So like right now, that class specifically is looking at news articles, you know, and trying to find true stories. And I always say it doesn't have to be front page. It doesn't have to be about the things we're dealing with right now this week. You could find a human interest story from 3 years ago. Heck, you could find one of those, you know, viral videos about a puppy being reunited with its owners. And there's a whole story there potentially. It might remind you of your own dog, right? The first time you met a puppy that became like your family's dog. Like that right there, there's emotion already attached. There's real worldness, there's humans. And I think like that's the thing that can really help someone with creation is kind of like asking yourself, well, what beyond movies and TV shows, what does make you creative? What makes you want to create things, try things, work on your voice? And so the hope is by giving them a lot of different exercises like that, you know, including, by the way, fables, folk tales, you know, legends. I grew up in Delaware, as we were talking, and you know, the camp story I remember saying that there was a human hand at the bottom of the pool. Now, when I was 7, I believed that. I don't believe it so much at my age now, but I remember me and my friends then coming up with a whole theory of what happened to the guy. Why was the hand down there? Whose hand was it? And from that, like, we had a whole story, you know. And of course, it got worse and worse over the years when we go back to camp. It wasn't just one hand, it was many hands. But that's story generation right there. You know, that's things we did when we were little kids. You know, it wasn't just about you have a homework assignment. We're always coming up with something.
What tools do you give writers to help them generate ideas?
So one thing we'll talk about in story generation is the difference of a premise and a story. So I think that right there is one part of the toolkit. It's like, okay, you might think of a vampire looking for a job. Like, okay, that could be like a fun episode of What We Do in the Shadows, I suppose. And there's a number of vampire comedies. But one sentence a story does not make. So then one of the tools we'll work on is like asking questions. Well, why does a vampire need a job? It's like, what happened to their money? Like if they've been around a long time, you know, like the families that came over from the Mayflower, like they tend to be pretty wealthy because guess what? They were able to get a lot of acreage of land pretty cheap at the time. And provided the family didn't mess it up along the way, well, they tend to do okay. And so we'll ask questions. Why? Why do they need a job? Okay. What kind of job would be the hardest for them to do? If you're doing a comedy, that's kind of a fun place to go. You know, who else is in their orbit? You know, what are their relationships? So a really good tool is, you know, ask questions of your own idea. You know, it's almost like being a little kid, to go back to that metaphor. Well, why? Why'd you do that, Dad? Like, what happened? Well, then what? It's like especially when you just want a little peace and quiet, those are the questions you get asked by really young kids. But it's not a bad way to approach a story. Ask a lot of questions of it. Ask questions of your character. You know, let's say you go to the Broad and you see an interesting piece of art. Well, then ask yourself the question, well, if there's a person in a painting, like, well, what were they doing a moment before? It's a question I would always ask actors when I directed plays. It's like if someone comes into a scene, where are you coming from? What were you just doing? You know, which sounds really obvious, but sometimes when you're acting, you forget that. Or when you're writing, you forget about the moment before the moment. And so I think like those kind of questions can really help give an idea or a premise legs, meaning like a movement, so it can be a story. So there can be an act 2, there can be obstacles and complications. Because without those questions, it might just stay a concept, an idea. a singular image as opposed to the, back in the day, 24 frames a second or 30 frames a second that we have with video, you know. And I think like those very basic questions oftentimes is a tool that it's easy to sort of forget about, but important to use. Because if you ask questions, then it means you have to come up with answers.
And if maybe the curiosity is not there, maybe that's testing it that you're not sure you even want to stay with the story for that long.
Right. It's a great point. Like if you're not finding the answers, maybe they aren't answers, right? So then it's like, okay, well, maybe then it is like, okay, maybe this is not the painting that's going to give you this story. Keep walking. You know, when we do the field trip, which is such a fun day. It's one of those, like, we always joke, it makes us all feel like, you know, we're young, you know, because we just walk around the museum and just try to take things in. But then you go to another piece. Maybe that's the thing that you'll be able to answer those questions.
Beyond key questions for generating ideas, are there any other tools for idea generation for stories?
You know, I think always have something with you to record. You know, that's something that, I mean, we have cell phones. I mean, prior to cell phones, it would be little notebooks, right? But the idea of like, you see something, don't let the idea like disappear. You know, we're kind of all like goldfish, like we swim around, we forget. So I think part of this is like, okay, like you might be out and about and you see an interaction between two people and it gets you thinking. You know, so write things down, record things, take pictures, but don't be weird, right? Don't be stalky, but keep track of those things. You know, that class specifically, do a lot of exercises in class, but then I tell them all, like, keep everything. You know, it's like to use Arrested Development, the great Carl Weathers had the joke about, you can make a stew. Like everything can be used to make a stew. Well, that's kind of ideation. You know, I had in high school, a girl said something to me, one sentence that inspired a script a bunch of years later. And it wasn't so much about what she said, it was about what I said back. And I had a script later about, well, what if I said the exact opposite thing? And a story came out of that, you know? And so part of this is like trying to remember things is hard. Writing down things isn't so hard. And I didn't write in high school like at all. So for me, it was, I'm not even sure how I got there, how I remembered that moment. But I think like, you know, we have so many ways of capturing things now. You know, if you're bopping around on Instagram or X or wherever else people are going nowadays in social media, like screen grab things, like, you know, have a little folder of photos that could potentially be, you know, part of your well of ideas, part of your arsenal of material.
It sounds like whatever that comment was, it meant something to you, whether it was negative or positive, you held on to it?
Yeah, well, and it was like an important moment. It was, you know, kind of went through something as a high schooler, and this was me kind of coming out of that, and then something said, I was like, whoa, that's unexpected. So, you know, enough that I remembered it later, you know, and I know sometimes writers will just go and take their diary and change names, which is not a bad angle to take, but it might limit you, you know, if you're just working off your own diary. And not to mention our real lives, sometimes they're hard to turn into stories because life doesn't necessarily move in a 3-act kind of way. It's why even like great stories based on true stories often have to change things, because it would be a 7-hour movie with a lot of dead time. You know, it's why when they did, Chernobyl, the miniseries, they had to basically take like 10 characters and combine them into one character that I believe was played by Samantha Morton. And she's wonderful in it, and it's a really, really good limited series. It's incredible, and won the Emmy for a reason. But they needed to do that because in the real world, it would have been 10 different scientists, which would have taken away some of the drama of having one character that we track.
Eric, what are your thoughts on writers using AI to generate story ideas?
All right, writers using AI. Well, the joke of it right now, of course, is maybe I'm not saying any of this, right? Maybe you guys later on are like, well, Eric could have been a little more interesting. We'll use some AI to get him to say what we want him to say. The recent writer's strike dealt with AI and this idea of like, okay, well, AI is a tool. It's not a solution for everything. And tools, though AI gets real close, they can't do it themselves. Like you might have great tools, but you need to have someone who wields those tools. Thor's hammer needs Thor, right? Or Captain America, of course. So I think AI can be utilized if it is run by a creative. Like if there's a creative working with AI, then it can work, but it also, what AI does, that's the complicated part of it, is anything you put in there, it takes. And so thus, it's like, well, writers are always worried about their own ideas, And I don't think people in Hollywood want to be known as copycats. It's a terrible reputation to have. People accusing anyone of stealing. Like, people don't want that reputation. It can follow you for a long time. So I think more times than not, you're pretty safe in Hollywood, provided you do what you need to do to protect yourself. But AI doesn't have that moral scale. AI will just take and take and take. And so what you're doing then is like you're giving away your ideas if you use AI to flesh it out. Like if you put in AI, I have an idea for a movie, a rom-com about a ghost and another ghost, but neither of them realize the other one is a ghost. Not a bad idea. No, but if you put that in AI, now AI has got that idea. And so guess what? AI is going to use it everywhere. And so I think it's such a slippery slope. There's, again, a reason why they've got a lot of work to do to figure it out. And I think like new technology is the reason oftentimes there's these impasses and why sometimes a writer's strike happens. Because it happened with like digital distribution. It was a new form of technology. What does this mean for the big picture? AI is maybe the most unusual of them all, at least in my lifetime. Because now it's like, okay, well, AI can do the work that other people did. One of the Marvel shows came under a little bit of attack because they used AI for their opening titles. But once again, I feel like if you have graphic designers working with AI, if you have creatives working with this tool, it can maybe enhance, but it means also like it still would have the vision of a human behind it. So that's always a hope with AI. And I know for writing students, we're like, don't let AI do your homework. Like the whole point is you're supposed to be the idea machines, not the machine. So if you just have AI write your stuff, there are ways of testing it, of course, but a lot of AI doesn't have yet that real human touch. Like it feels a little bit like plastic, right, as opposed to organic material. So it's so complicated, and it's one of those, I don't have that answer. None of us do yet. And I'm curious in 5 years, 10 years, what this all is going to look like. But I do think if writers almost more use it as a tool for research, it can help. Like if you go into ChatGPT and you want to learn about I don't know, the fall of the Roman Empire, it can help you there. But then now write me a screenplay about the fall of the Roman Empire. Well, it could do it, but it's going to probably not read very well. And I think we've seen that time and again where the AI's limitations. I mean, even AI Photoshop kind of work, where everyone's got like 7 fingers. It's like, because it's not human. And it doesn't have also that human POV, again, yet. But my last name's Connor, and of course it took a Connor to fight the evil Terminator and Cyberdyne, so maybe I was born a little suspicious of the machine. I don't know.
How do some of your students feel about AI, whether they use it for story generation or image generation?
In my classes, it feels like they haven't necessarily gone there yet. And I think part of it is because of what I'm teaching or what I've been teaching since AI really kicked in. So for thesis class, for instance, like they might have an idea, but then they're always going to be working with feedback they get from the humans in class. So even using AI, it feels like, well, they're getting so much feedback, so many suggestions from breathing, living humans. hopefully reduces the need for them to feel compelled to use AI. And like pretty much every Institute of Higher Learning, we have rules about using AI. Where I think it can actually be a really nice, valuable tool is if you're putting together like a pitch deck. So you have an idea for a feature screenplay or a TV pilot, and you're trying to find images and you're running a little bit low on what you can find out there or what you can create. So this is where AI sometimes can be helpful, is like if you're pitching something, doesn't mean you would do it for the film itself, the TV show itself, I hope. But in terms of helping people see what you see, that might be where you could go with it. But again, you run that risk of like, well, you've just shared your idea. You know, it goes back to like Napster with music, you know, the fear like Metallica had. It's like all of a sudden, oh, great, now no one's going to buy our music. Well, they've done okay since. I'm not too worried about them. But I think that's always the downside. And I think students are very aware of it. You know, the internet wasn't around when I was a kid, but the internet was around for most of them when they were young. Even our oldest students, you know, had access to these things. And so I think they've always understood the sort of balance. I think they understand there are limitations to what AI can give you. You know, it might throw things at you, but it's kind of like throwing spaghetti on the wall to see what sticks. That's sometimes what AI might give you. And I think also too, and maybe it's optimism. Maybe it's doe-eyed optimism, but I hope my students, our students at this school, I hope writers like are pushing themselves, because, you know, that's why we do it, right? Is to create. And so, you know, yeah, it's great to get a strike when the bumpers are up on the bowling alley, but wow, when you're able to get a strike without them, it feels so much better. And so for the writers to really push themselves, creatives to really push themselves. So it might be a tool you use, but it's not the tool. The tool you use is your brain, right? The tool you use is your experience, your worldview, your point of view. The things AI can't replicate just yet.
Right, and currently AI is a very hot topic, and supposedly it's going to revolutionize everything, but we do go through cycles where people rebel against certain things. I see a lot of young people at bus stops reading paperbacks.
Yeah.
And so I haven't seen that in a long time, and I know there's been a thought that we aren't reading anymore, but I see a lot of people with paperbacks that are much younger. And so sometimes we go through these phases where we don't want the old established things, right. So we don't know.
Well, vinyl came back. I mean, vinyl outsold CDs for the past chunk of years, you know, and record store day to me is like, wow, that's beautiful. You know, as a music lover, even though I do not have an extensive vinyl collection, I have mad respect for those who do. And I think part of it too, and the metaphor I think is applicable, like when you go to someone's house and they put on a vinyl, they keep on the vinyl. It's you don't bounce around from song to song to song. It's like you put on the A side of one of your favorite albums and you let it play. And there's something to be said about that. And I think like AI is a little bit more like, I don't know, the playlist. You know, the Infinite Playlist, I think was that name of that one show. Nora's Infinite Playlist, I think it was called, something like that. But I think the writer is the one that's going to come up with the A side and the B side, the whole album, as opposed to just maybe part of a catchy track.
If you are interested in storytelling, you may also like our new book, Story Questions. It's a story tool that offers you over 1,500 story questions that you can use as story prompts. It's packed with over 40 categories, so whether you are in the brainstorming stages, developing characters, dialogue, or rewriting, it can help you at every stage of the writing process. Think about this statement. Most powerful stories are just great answers to strong questions. We've linked up to story questions in the information section below. You have another class here at NYFA that is about scene study. Can you give us an overview of the class?
Sure. So scene study, I compared it to like deep tissue massage or Thai massage, if you've ever had one, where they get in there and you really work on specific points of your back, let's say. So these students, scene study is right towards the end of their time for the BFA and the MFA programs. And so they've workshop material, they have gotten feedback from their classmates, their instructors, their advisors. But where scene study goes a little bit maybe deeper and different is instead of macro, it's micro. You basically put your story under a microscope. And so we focus on a few key scenes from, let's say, a thesis screenplay. And for me, it's funny because I've taught a lot of different classes here, but it's one I think I first taught just a couple of semesters ago. But it was great for me because it was like going back to the stage. It was like, so much of it's about acting. What's behind the line? Line objective action that's used in directing, acting, writing, and so that notion of, okay, well, what is my objective, right? The old cliche that you always hear with actors. But the truth is, like, why is the character saying this? How would they say it? Is this really the right language for them? Where's the scene going? Who has the power in the scene? And you begin to realize how many distinct beats are in a scene. Let's say a 3-page scene. And you think, well, 3 pages, it's only maybe about 3 minutes. How much is going on? But then you watch a really good scene, like we used She Said, the movie that was about the Weinstein trial. And there's just a scene between a reporter and one of the women that Weinstein attacked. And she's trying to get this woman to come out and go on record. And so you think, okay, well, that's what the scene's about. But then you realize there's all these beats along the way. There's the initial introduction. There's the mentioning, she's a reporter for the New York Times. She mentions the name Miramax. All of a sudden, that brings up all these things. And so you begin to realize, oh my gosh, this scene has so many pieces to it. Are you doing each piece justice? And what's really great is in that class, we also bring in actors to work with them. And last semester, brought in a friend of mine who I had acted with a million years ago in college, and had her work on one student's project where she was sort of like the villain of the piece. And initially it was written for male, and I talked to the writer. I'm like, well, I know a friend of mine was interested in helping out. She's really good, but she's female. Are you okay with the gender switch? She's like, yeah, for the class, why not? And she brought such this like creepy, almost like a Rosemary's Baby, maternal quality that was unsettling. And she never acted mean, and it made everything she said all the more dramatic. And without really changing the dialogue, but just she changed her attitude with it from what was maybe on the page. And the best part was the writer afterwards came out to me, he's like, I think I need to change the gender of that character. And I'm like, well, you don't have to. And he's like, no, but once she was doing that, kind of went with a maternal angle, it really got me thinking. That's the hope with scene study, is you begin to realize, okay, every scene, every line needs that. I always say it's precious real estate when you have a feature or a TV show, particularly if you're doing like a half-hour show on network TV. Those are only like 22 minutes long. So you have like almost no fat. And yes, of course, some TV shows have fat. There's plenty of shows, and I won't disparage any shows, but there's definitely shows where you're like, okay, well, that felt like an episode just to fatten the goose. Like it was just, they didn't know what they were doing, so they just kind of paused for an episode. But the truth is, if you're trying to get a script read, you're trying to get people to respond to it, every line, every page has to keep them reading. And so I think like in the end of it all, scene study is asking a lot of questions of your own scenes. And then taking the lessons from, let's say it's like 2 scenes from your thesis and applying that to the entire script. So that then you're thinking about, okay, would the person really talk this way? Where's the scene going? Who's got the power in the scene? How can I reverse the reader's expectations in this moment? What am I playing with that are tropes versus what's just a cliche? So it's such a fun class to work on. I mean, it's workshop. Everyone brings in their own material. And what's really cool is even before they work on their thesis, they will revisit one of their first scripts they wrote. And I joke, I'm like, it can be humbling, but it also is really good for your ego. When you're towards the end of your time in a film school program, you realize, oh my God, I have grown, right? I have learned, and then sometimes you're like, wow, that script was actually pretty good. I need to go back to it. I need to work on it. Because the hope is our students, when they're done, they have a whole arsenal of material, not just one script. Even when Ron Howard spoke here, he's like, to show you're a writer, you have to write like a lot. It's not just about you have one script. It's like, no, you got lots of scripts. That means you're a writer, not that you've written, you know? And so the hope is with scene study, it's like take the lessons and the work of just doing a few pages over the course of many weeks. And by doing the sort of deep tissue massage, you then realize what the whole body needs as opposed to just that one moment.
I know you had already mentioned She Said, but can you take a moment and think about a scene you absolutely love?
Oh, sure. I always joke I have like the 20 films that are like my go-tos. And I update them because time passes. And I also try to bring in more diversity in the kind of scenes I show, the kind of characters I use. But there's one I always go back to in Quiz Show. So if you don't know Quiz Show, it was about a legendary scandal from the early 1960s involving a game show called 21, where they were giving the answers to one of the contestants because they thought, well, he's kind of awesome. We want him to be our champ. So Ken Jennings, I'm sure, is brilliant and did it all on his own, but imagine, just as a metaphor, is if Ken Jennings on Jeopardy was given the answers because the producers thought, well, it's a great story to have the guy keep coming back. I'm sure he didn't, he's so smart. But in the case of 21, it turned out, yeah, no, they were giving answers to people. So this one scene I absolutely love. It's this guy comes up from Washington who's investigating. The rumors come around down the pike or down 95 that in essence it's rigged. And it was a period of time too. America still very much believed what they saw on the TV. We're a lot more cynical now. And with deep fakes and everything else, we have to be, right? But at the time, it's like, well, of course it's telling the truth. And we, of course, have shows like, Survivor and Big Brother and The Bachelor. So we're always a little suspect. They weren't. And so for people to realize, oh my God, like Van Doren, the character played by Ralph Fiennes, might have been fed the answers. No way, he seems so brilliant. So this scene is this lawyer who's investigating, and he talks to the guy that lost to Van Doren, played by John Turturro, Herbie Stemple. He goes to Herb Stemple's home, which is in Queens, and it is chaos. It's, dare I say, not unlike my own house. Kids playing drums, the wife's there, and her shirt's unbuttoned. She's not expecting company. It's chaotic, it's loud, it's life, And meanwhile, this attorney is a little bit fancy. He went to Harvard, as he calls it, with his very thick Boston accent. And he wants to find out what Herb, the former champion, told. He had testified in front of a jury about what happened. And initially, he can't tell him. And so that's the goal of the scene for this attorney, played by Rob Morrow, is to find out what Herbie said, what he knows. What's really great, though, is there's so much undercurrent in the scene. Herbie is Jewish, and so is this attorney, Goodwin, but he doesn't realize that. He offers him a piece of rugelach, which is, as he calls it, a Jewish delicacy, sort of like a baklava. And he keeps offering it, and the lawyer's like, no, thank you, no, thank you. And then he's like, oh, come on, it's a Jewish delicacy. He goes, oh, I'm very familiar with rugelach. Herbie and his wife look at each other with, oh, he's one of us. And so now it changes how he talks to him. Because then he's thinking, well, he's on my team. And meanwhile, the lawyer isn't so easily swayed. But then when the lawyer says, hey, can you tell me what you said? He's like, oh, no, I can't, it's sealed. So what's the lawyer do? He takes one of the pieces of rugelach, takes a bite. He goes, just between us. So then the idea of, okay, he's breaking bread with him. Now he talks to him. And he talks to him with this idea of, okay, if you want to really make a name for yourself as an attorney, you got to go after Van Doren, the current champion. Problem is, Goodwin, the lawyer, really likes Van Doren. But he's like, but think about it. It'd be like a big blonde Sputnik crashing on his head. And so the idea of who has the power at the scene, well, initially the lawyer, he's trying to get information. But then Herbie Stemple, the John Turturro character with the missing tooth, is the one who gets him to say, no, if you want to find out what happened, Go after the big guy. Don't go after me. Like, I can only give you so much. Take down Van Doren. And so there is, every line means something. They even say at one point, like, well, this isn't McCarthyism. He goes, well, yeah, but think about what McCarthyism did for McCarthy. And I watch that, and every time I marvel at the work of Paul Attanasio, who wrote that script, and Robert Redford, who directed the film. So yes, it's a 30-year-old movie, 31-year-old film. One that's sort of forgotten because it came out the same year as Pulp Fiction and Quiz Show and Shawshank. So, I'm sorry, Pulp Fiction, Shawshank, Forrest Gump. So Quiz Show was it was nominated for a lot, but isn't remembered in the same way. But to me, it does everything a scene needs to do. Every line means something. The character voices are pitch perfect. Time and place are very much all over that thing. Modern references to things like McCarthyism, to Sputnik. So I look at that, I marvel at it. And I've used that in many classes. But every time I'm also just like humbled, like, geez, how do you pull that off? But I feel like I also tell my writers, well, this wasn't the first draft. This was worked on and worked on and worked on and polished. And so, yeah, it's gonna have a lot to it because they put a lot into it. And then it was directed and edited and brilliantly acted. A bunch of Academy Award nominees in that film. So it's kind of like, yeah, this is the end result. But know what you're going after. And that writer really knew what he was going after.
We often hear that there has to be conflict in every scene. Can we break down what this really means?
I think when the idea of conflict in every scene, it's like, well, where does the scene go? That's part of it, right? Does the scene arc? If it's just information can be pretty dull. So then it's like, okay, well, then where's the conflict in the information? It's like, well, maybe the information creates the conflict. Character realizes he just got a huge inheritance. But the problem is now other people nearby are going to want that money. So now all of a sudden that scene has conflict in it. So I think, like, a conflict means, like, it has some energy to it. And conflict, by the way, is every genre. Horror, comedy. I mean, think of comedy is conflict. Because comedy is always about wrong turns, problems, right? And drama is that too. So I think, yeah, without conflict, you run that risk. I would say, like, that's a flat line. If your EKG shows that, that's not good, right? If your script shows that, also maybe not the best thing. Now, there are sometimes a scene that, this is a great moment. I'm going to old school again. I am so sorry. I swear I've seen recent films, but The Natural, about a baseball player, older baseball player, also Robert Redford, director of Quiz Show. And there's this great moment I love that it's just the team is winning. And so we have this nice little moment that I think you could argue doesn't have much conflict in it, where it's just them practicing, but they're happy. And they have changed their attitude. And so even though this moment doesn't necessarily have much conflict in it, it does show a change of the character of the team. So even without conflict, it does have an arc. It's part of the arc of the team's character. And then it also has an important moment where, for the first time, they watch Roy Hobbs, played by Robert Redford, pitch. And you realize he was a natural-born pitcher. But you also see it hurts him when he pitches because he had been shot. It's a really great film, fabulous music too. But that's a moment that doesn't necessarily have much underlying conflict, but I think it still works. So if there isn't some kind of conflict between characters in the scene, then I think the question becomes, okay, well, what's the scene add to the whole? Like, why have it? What's the arc? Where do we go? I always use the term, how does the needle move? So if the needle hasn't moved at all, then what's the point of the scene? And exposition can have conflict in it. Terminator, when he has to explain what a T-800 is, I believe that's the model of Arnold, it's also happening as they're being chased. And so Reese has to tell Sarah Connor, no relation, all these things, or else Sarah's going to jump out of a moving car. So thus you have a lot of exposition, but it's wrapped in conflict. It's them driving for their lives, And so thus, like, the exposition is purposeful, and it's said for a reason. So yeah, no, I think you're always looking for like, if there's no conflict in the scene, it could end very quickly. It's like a one-punch knockout. So if a character needs something, if I want to steal your camera, and I go, hey, can I borrow your camera? And you go, sure. Well, like, well, that wasn't very interesting. If you say no, and then I have to finagle a way to get that camera, well, there's conflict. There's obstacles. And then the scene is going someplace. So it's not just this.
And conflict can also show who a character is and
Right.
bring out more of them, their personality. Like I'm going to date myself with this one, but planes, trains, and automobiles.
Ah, yes.
And so Steve Martin, all the conflict that he's sort of encountering is reinforcing sort of this corporate, like elitist guy, whereas John Candy, things just kind of flow to the
Right.
guy, and nobody's mad at him, and actually people want to go out of their way and help him. And so it kind of informs who these two are.
Right, conflict, it's, I think a term I'll use sometimes is put the characters in the wild. So like, characters shouldn't be in vacuums. They're not in their own little isolated pods, except for maybe Wally, right? But the truth is, like, yeah, you learn so much about characters, how they deal with conflict. And, you know, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles is great comedy, but it also has pathos. You know, but the one doesn't hurt the other because there's constant conflict between them. And then also, of course, by the way, conflict between a character and themselves, right? Like that's oftentimes the biggest conflict you can create is like, well, what's stopping someone? You know, why doesn't that character just say, I love you? You know, what is making it hard for themselves to get what they want or need? So conflict can come from outside or inside. And I think in the end of it all, you look at each scene and if you ask yourself, well, how's it move the needle? How's it arc? How is this helping the overall flow? Then a scene always has a reason to exist, even if it's just a bunch of dudes kind of hanging around playing baseball and having fun. It's like, yeah, but compared to how miserable they were just a few scenes ago, it's an important moment.
How does emotion factor into a great scene?
Well, I think it's interesting. The emotion is, well, you have the emotions of the character. Then you also have the emotions of the audience that you gotta maybe think about a little bit. You know, if you put a subject in peril, like ask questions like, well, do we care? It's a trick they do on like all those medical shows. You meet these characters and they're guest stars, right? They're only gonna be in this episode. They have some unusual condition that's gonna take them all 5 acts of the episode to figure out. What are you gonna do up front to make us actually care? You know, so that life or death is on the line here, but we care if they pull through. And so I think like that's where you think about a little bit of the emotion of the audience. It's like, well, how are we going to connect with this character? And it doesn't mean every character has to be super lovable. Tony Soprano wasn't lovable, but we connected with him. We understood him. So what makes the character connectable? What makes it so the audience will actually have some skin in the game? The audience will feel something if something happens to them. Root for them or root against them, by the way. Great villains, of course. And then I think also within the scene, within the characters, even if they're not humans, Wally was not a human character, but you always could understand what he was feeling. You know, and it's hats off to the brilliant artists over at Pixar. Great writing. It was up for a screenplay Oscar, I believe. But also just how you always understood emotionally what he was thinking and feeling, just by a little move of his eyes or his visors, whatever they were on top of his eyes. You know, and so I think, yeah, it always goes back to emotion, right? Even if it's a silly film, even if it's a comedy, even if it's, a slasher. You know, the truth is, like, the first thing I always say to people working in horror as their genre of choice, it's like, well, what scares you? You know, it's not a bad place to start, even if it's not what you're writing about. But like being able to remember the emotions, like some of us were afraid of going in our own basements. LA doesn't have many basements, but you know, us who grew up elsewhere, right, we had basements and usually something scary was down there, like an old washer dryer or a burner, a furnace. If you remember, Kevin McAllister in Home Alone was terrified of his burner. Then he wasn't so terrified to almost kill 2 random men, but that burner scared him throughout the film until he conquered that fear. But that's a writer, John Hughes, who clearly has a memory of these things, remembers what it was like to feel these things, to feel scared of something. And I think emotions, it kind of keeps us honest, right? If you ask those questions of like, well, what are they feeling? Like, why are they acting this way? A lot of times when movies might lose me a little bit is when characters act in ways that don't make sense for the character. That feels like, well, they're trying to add drama, but emotionally it feels false.
Right, like The Exorcist might be far more scarier than, let's say, Nightmare on Elm Street, just because fear of the supernatural and sort of than some deranged creature that's following you or something.
Right. It's like, I remember seeing Friday the 13th Part 2 when I was way too young. And then my buddy and I that night were trying to go to sleep, and we both were absolutely convinced that Jason came in through the window of my house. And to this day, he's still one of my closest friends. We'll bring that up every now and again because it was such a vivid memory. But yeah, that totally was the thing that got us. Nightmare on Elm Street didn't scare me as much when I was a kid. I loved them.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But Jason, I was always afraid of an actual Jason somewhere out there.
Right.
I think I still am.
What's the most perfect screenplay that you recommend to your students?
Oh, that's a great question. The most perfect screenplay. Definitely there's not one. It'd be funny if I said, oh yeah, the one I wrote. Here it is. I think you almost have to look at it as like, okay, perfect for what? So perfect horror, perfect comedy. Tootsie is one of my very favorites. Again, old school, I'm sorry. I promise I watch newer films. But Tootsie was also, what's fascinating is how much they changed it in post-production. So I can look at that film and tell you probably 100 reasons why I think it's one of the great screenplays, and yet so much of it got changed. So much of it was made kind of like what it takes to turn a coal into a diamond, under duress, or how a pearl gets created, right? It takes an agitation for a pearl to be formed. It's like a secretion on top of the agitation. Sometimes movies go through that. So in the case of Tootsie, I don't know if I've come across the original script, but knowing the script that basically is the film, it for my money is one of the perfect comedies. But then that doesn't necessarily mean if someone's writing a drama, it's something I would recommend, because it's great for its genre. So then you look over it like, well, what's a perfect drama? Well, I don't know if it's perfect, but I thought like a recent one, Manchester by the Sea, because it was all about emotional truth. Character finds out he's dying, and they're a bunch of, Boston sort of, tough guys. And so they're swearing at each other, yelling, arguing. It's a heartbreaking scene and it's hysterical all at once. That's pretty special. That's one of those, like, you watch it, like, wow, okay. That takes another level of writing and directing and acting to make that work. Because that could have been such a mess of a scene. Instead, you feel it. And it's incredibly believable. It's very human, the drama of that. And so what I love about that, what to me makes that a perfect script, is so different than what makes Tootsie a perfect script. There's a lot of crossover, rooted in character, plant and payoff, but the things that make that such an interesting read is very different than what makes Tootsie an interesting read.
Do you find your students enjoy reading scripts that are 20 plus years old, that there's a nostalgia there?
I think part of this, like, we literally have a class that's genre. And so one thing genre does is it necessitates students look at older films. I think that's where I try to mix it up. So, She Said, I mentioned, it was just the script's only a couple of years old. I'll use something like that, but then I'll use something maybe from the 80s or 70s even. Sometimes even the 60s, The Apartment, Billy Wilder's amazing movie. I think it deepens an understanding of cinema when you can speak a bit of cinema history, but at the same time, it's such a different industry now. Even Tootsie, which I love, it might not work now in 2025. I think there's questions of gender that it doesn't address at all, gender identity, that if you're doing 2025, you would have to. And so I think like there are movies that work in that time, and you have to understand it works in that time. There's also movies that I just avoid from the past. Like, not From Here to Eternity. Oh my God, Rhett Butler, Scarlett O'Hara, Gone with the Wind. Yeah, Gone with the Wind is a remarkable cinematic achievement. It is troubling, though, to look at the politics within that. And it's in some ways like as great a piece of cinema as it is, there's other ones you can find that I think can work without students bumping their head up against it. And understandably, So I think there are other stories you can find that maybe have like the sweeping beauty of that film without its sort of troubling undercurrents, if you will. But that's a real challenge, right? In 2025, you always got to think about what speaks to students right now. And our students are not but one age, Some of the students are only a little bit younger than me. So kind of making sure it's something that could speak to everyone. And not every movie will, and that's why we try to have a really good variety of content to make sure a lot of bases are covered.
We often hear never put an age limit on art in terms of don't worry about being too old. Does one have to worry about being too young to be a writer, filmmaker?
I mean, the joke of it, of course, is, LA age, Hollywood age. So I don't mind admitting I'm 50. In Hollywood, that means I'm like 180, I think. I'm not sure. But the joke of it is, what history has shown us time and again is if someone really has a voice that they connect to and that they've developed, there's not an age limit either direction. There are filmmakers who got their first real sort of break many years after they finished film school. But then we've had students here who made feature films by the time they were 20, because they had such a passion and it never dawned on them, well, maybe I'm too young. I mean, there's a high school filmmaker who's done 2 or 3 features, not one who went here that I've read about. And so I think anyone can, what makes you a writer? You sit down, you write. That was the toughest thing for me because I came personally from theater. I did theater before I went back to grad school for film school. And even though the joke of it is I always say I was the world's worst English major because I got into college because of my math scores. And then I feel like I pulled a fast one on Penn and I said, well, I'm actually going to focus on English and communication, sorry, and spend way too much time in theaters, And for me, I always got intimidated by writing because I would read such great pieces of theater and I was like, geez, I don't think I have a Hamlet in me or Sam Shepard's work. And then I had a wonderful teacher first semester who, really sort of encouraged us well, don't worry about climbing the mountain on that first day, just go up a little hill. And so we would do these short projects, short scripts, and he'd give us real specific instructions, write about a conflict, for instance. And that, for me, helped tremendously. Also, back in the day, we had this thing called video stores. You may have heard of them. And sometimes you would just walk, I would walk around Blockbuster when we had those. And you begin to see there's just a lot of stories out there. And of course, that includes documentaries. That includes animation. I mean, that shorts, features, everything. And I think for me, that helped. And I was already in my early mid-20s at that point. And one thing, we have classes here for younger students. Both my sons have taken classes here. So they have it for kids and for high school age. I think they used to call them tweens, but I think that we don't use that term anymore. And one thing I would always push is okay, well, you're not writing 100 pages, but you are writing a 2-page story. What's the beginning, middle, and end? And it's incredible what these younger students could figure out and come up with in such inventive ways to work around things like not having dialogue. Do a story without them talking, but they still communicate. But they've all know about this because they all have cell phones. And so they've communicated without talking for a lot of their lives. So I think, there's not an age limit either direction because part of it is just, you want to write, write. That's a line from Quiz Show. You want to be a knight? You think you're a knight? Be a knight. Talking about Don Quixote. So I think like that's part of it. It's just giving people an on-ramp so they can see, okay, oh, maybe I can do this. And maybe I can't write 120 pages the first time I sit down and use Final Draft software, but I probably could write 3 pages if I give myself that space and time to try it. And for me, it was just getting past the fear of like feeling like I wasn't a writer. But I realized like sometimes those labels you put on yourselves, gosh, they can be so limiting, right? And conversely, sometimes you give yourself a label that you can't live up to. So I think it's just like, yeah, you feel like you're a writer, well then write. I know it sounds simplistic, but there's something to be said for just the process of what one of my colleagues used to call butt time. Sit down, type. Maybe you like standing. I don't want to talk down against those who stand while they type. It's fine. It never worked for me. But fine for you. Whatever gets you doing this or doing this. That's writing. That's being a writer.
Sure.
Hopefully someone pays you.
And there can also be pressure the other way that if you come from a group of brilliant people that you're not going to measure up.
Right.
So why even try it? Because then you might fail publicly or in front of your family or peers, whatever.
Yeah, and I think even like public speaking, right? So many people are like, it's like their biggest fear. It's like you get a microphone in their hand and all of a sudden they feel like they're looking down the barrel of like a dozen guns. It's like, no, like that microphone's not going to hurt you. Yeah, your own words could hurt you. You got to be careful. But the truth is, like, we all have a voice. It's just a matter of like trying. And then maybe you also find out maybe writing isn't your thing, but wow, you're really good at editing. Like, oh, you really know where to put a camera. You're great with sound. I mean, that's one of the cool things that happens in film school. For me, it was finding writing because I was focused so much on like directing. A lot of people are in film school. But then writing was the thing that surprised me and, kind of caught me off guard. And even being an English major, it was different studying other people's work versus creating my own. And so I think like, yeah, hopefully you make it so people feel of any age, our youngest student to our oldest student feels like, yeah, you got a voice. Just explore it, try.
You mentioned earlier that you have a youth program here at NYFA. Can you tell us more about that?
Am I allowed to say I'm jealous of my own kids who took these classes?
Sure.
Because, I grew up in Delaware in 1980s. Like, we didn't have film programs. Like, I couldn't just go down the street and film at Universal. I could go to, I don't know, the DuPont Experimental Station, an actual place in Delaware. But I wasn't allowed to film there, even though my dad worked there. So I think like the programs here for the younger students, we don't water it down. I always joke about there's not directing for kids. So it's not like, okay, guys, now we're going to do a 2-shot. It's like, no, like, yes, you have to make it accessible. I'm not going to show the same clips I'll show my MFA candidates to my younger students, but a movie like Babe, I would show to any of them. If I'm showing an example of like a perfectly directed scene, I'd show that to any age. And so I think it's again, to use the word accessibility, the youth programs here are so good because we really treat the younger students just like we treat any other storytellers. The expectations is that if they're here, they're interested in it, and they're not at the pool necessarily, although the kids who stay over, I think, are able to go swimming and whatnot. But if they're here just for, a bunch of classes, like, we're not going to water it down. We're not going to dumb it down because that's not what you can really do with creativity. But we'll make it accessible. We'll say, okay, your first film is a 1-minute non-dialogue scene in continuity, real time. So what's an interesting story? If we're talking about real time, what's a moment that people don't speak and it's natural? And we'll put up a whole list on the board of that, And so that then they're not trying to mime it or pantomime it, but they're really thinking of situations they're in. And then all of a sudden you have students talk about, oh yeah, this time I had to take a final and I realized I was running out of time. and half my test wasn't done. And so it's like all of a sudden talking about something incredibly relatable by everyone, including someone my age. And so then we developed that. And I think like that's what's so terrific about the younger programs here, is it gives students a real taste of storytelling and filmmaking, so that it's not just like, for kids, for dummies, or it's not. It's for anyone. And you make it so it makes sense for kids of all ages, but we put the cameras in their hand pretty quickly. We sit them down and get them working, and the kids really respond to it. Both my sons had such a great time here, but I've also taught this, and some of my former students are people years later that I've seen do such amazing stuff. Some of them have gone on and made feature films. One of them became an exec over at Nickelodeon and a cartoon writer. I went on a tour of Nickelodeon not long ago, and I just shot her a quick note. I'm like, hey, I'm in your building. Are you around? She came down, and hadn't seen her since I don't even know when. But she's out there doing her thing, and it started with her being a high school student here. So there's something pretty special about that.
And it dispels the myth that just because you're of a certain age, you don't have something to say.
I mean, does Billie Eilish, how many, she's got, 2 Oscars already, a bunch of Grammys, and there's nothing about her writing that makes her seem like she doesn't have stories to tell or things to say. You listen to her voice, and it's like, wow, like, she's done a lot of living in her living, And I think, the ageism can go both directions. And that all being said, I think also, though, being realistic with kids, talking about the industry, and then we don't get too deep into the weeds of, a pitch when I'm talking to like a 12-year-old student. But the idea of being able to talk about your story is, my gosh, you can use that for so many things. Because if you can talk about your own story, then you can do a presentation in class and maybe not be so concerned or afraid. If you've directed and you've had to organize a bunch of people, well, then the next time you have a group project, how different that is. So, the learning skills, even for those who have not gone on to become filmmakers, you'll just, it helps you grow up a lot, learn a lot in not a very long period of time. So, it's a really fun program to teach. And when I can, I always try to find time to do at least one of those classes, because it's just so rewarding for me. And I always hope that some of the youth rubs off of me, probably not much, but their excitement about it, optimism, I think it's easy to lose those things sometimes in Hollywood.
Do you always submit the screenplays that you write to screenplay contests?
Not always, but I am a little more positive about those contests than others. The first agent I had, a lot of years ago, I met him because I had won a contest while I was still a grad student, and it was through what's called the Sloan Foundation, and they had a few different events which eventually connected me with the Hamptons Film Festival. And so then I met an agent there, and mind you, it was all like a half year later, finally, after talking a lot and sharing one of the scripts I'd worked on with a co-writer, he eventually said, okay, yeah, I think I could represent this. But it was a lot of dancing before we got there, I bring that up just to say, like, it helped me. It doesn't help everyone. There are contests out there that I always say, just do your homework on them, because if you've never heard of it, that doesn't mean it's terrible, or it means maybe it is. So do a bit of homework on whatever contest you enter. Even if it's only, a $30 entry fee, you don't want to just throw good money after bad. So that all being said, the contests, they're hard, but it's hard breaking in as a creative. So in essence, like, it's already kind of complicated. So what I think it can help with is it can help you maybe break a little bit away from the clutter. And so for even my own experience, the reason I was able to meet this agent was because I had a script that at least some people liked, and one of whom said, oh, you should meet Eric and whatever. And so just that alone didn't mean I was going to get signed like that or win, Fortune and Glory or any of that, but it at least helped me meet someone I might not have met otherwise. I know people who haven't, won contests but were quarterfinalists, semifinalists. That alone was something that helped them meet execs, meet agents, managers. Because the idea that someone says, of the million screenplays out here, this one's pretty okay, that sometimes can be enough to start a communication. So I don't have that cynicism. That I think I understand the cynicism of it and the hesitation. I'm working on a pilot with a partner, and she's a little bit more hesitant to sort of put it out to the contest market because it's also based on her family. And so for that, it's like, okay, I'm not going to push because it makes sense. Everyone's got their own comfort level with these things. I do think if you're new and you're starting off, again, you do a little bit of research, it can actually be quite helpful potentially. It's a long shot. Life's a long shot, I guess, so it's okay. And you get used to the word no a lot in this town. So I don't know, what's another no? But that idea of when you see you've made some kind of cut, meaning you're a quarterfinalist or something, it can actually be good. And occasionally, yeah, you need those little victories. I had a short script that was a quarterfinalist. I don't remember the name of the contest. But just seeing my name on that list, I was like, oh, okay. I guess I'm not kidding myself too bad. So it can help. But the idea that it can help you separate from the pack, that alone might be worth the risk.
And especially too, if you're not in this town, you said we hear no a lot, then it might be another sort of foray into the business. Sure.
A guy I'm friendly with who lives in New York came out for, I think it was the Big Break contest they do through Final Draft. And so it's kind of awesome. He got brought out here. I got flown out to New York for a film festival. It was, of all things, the Howard Stern Film Festival.
Oh, great.
I was a finalist for that. And I joke that I think most of the entrants, I can't even imagine what those films were. Mine at least was coherent. Inappropriate, but coherent. And it was great. I mean, I think those are experiences. In film festivals, similar thing. You always just got to make sure it's worth it. But I'm part of the Burbank Film Festival board, and I mean, I could tell you, all these filmmakers meeting each other, connecting, it's fabulous because you kind of need that village to do it out here. Unless you're, I don't know, Robert Rodriguez, who does every single job, including, I think, parking the cars and cooking the food. He does everything on his films. But more times than not, yeah, you're going to need some collaborators because that's how it works. So that's how you might find your village, especially if you're not in the village of Los Angeles.
Are there certain genres or story types that work best for screenwriting contests?
Fortunately, there's a lot of contests that, there's a number of people I know do horror, but there's a lot of horror contests. So I don't know if there's necessarily one genre that is better than others. I think, dramas have their own sort of unique pull. What sometimes can be tough is if you have a low concept drama. When I say low concept, it doesn't mean lesser concept. It means one sentence maybe doesn't do the whole story justice. So someone has to really read the script, not just hear the pitch. But I feel like there's just enough contest festivals. I mean, even the festival, I'm part of Burbank's International Film Festival. There's blocks of films like horror and adventure, action, comedy, first-time filmmakers, high school, female filmmakers. So I think you find there's a sort of a good breadth of possibilities. So I don't think there's necessarily one type that's the express lane. I think you find if you write a good story, I mean, that can transcend genre. I mean, even The Substance just got nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture and Best Director, and that's basically a horror film. Body horror is the subgenre they used to describe it, and yet it really played, it connected to people. And as a result, it's up there with movies like The Brutalist and Wicked, which are completely different genres than that one.
Nosferatu.
Nosferatu, right? Yeah, that guy, that thing's making Nosferatu is making $100 million. That movie came out on Christmas Day. Christmas Day, Nosferatu, vampire movie. But people were compelled by the story and of course, the style.
Right,
and
Robert
so I
Eggers.
think it found its audience.
What do successful short films have in common?
Am I allowed to say they're short?
Sure, that's okay.
So sometimes I do a lot of judging for short films through HollyShorts, Burbank Film Festival, and occasionally get roped into some other ones. And when I see a movie is 25 minutes long, I don't want to make it sound like I hold something against longer films, right? I'm not a lengthist or whatever the term might be. But you better have a great reason for that being 25 minutes. And guess what? Some of them do. But then other times I'm like, okay, I'm 5 minutes in, where's this thing going? And that doesn't mean a movie can't be abstract. It might not have the most clean approach to a hero story, a 3 acts. That's fine. But I'm thinking about this is going to be part of a slot of films. So when we talk about short films, if you're talking festival, it's a little bit different if you're only thinking about putting it up on YouTube. But if you're thinking festivals, you have to think about, okay, will this film play nice with others? So if it's really long, it's like, well, did it earn its length? Sometimes, by the way, I'll see a 2-minute short film. I'm like, oh, cool. And then you're like, oh, even 2 minutes was too long. I think it's just, in the end of it all, what are you going after? What's the hook of it? You know, I sometimes will see a short film which baffles me, and yet I can't stop thinking about it. David Lynch did that to me many times over as a filmmaker. And so those are movies I'll totally push for. And there's something really sweet. There was one short film I really loved that, I apologize, I'm blanking on the name, but I remember it's like an unusual love story, a young woman. It was, I think, filmed in Poland. And it was so beautifully done and so well acted. And I remember the last scene is her kind of running for freedom with her new friend. And she has like a problem with her legs, so she has crutches. But then she tosses her crutches on and just limps along to catch up with him. And I remember thinking that is joyous. And then we took that film and I moderated the Q&A for that one. And I even said, okay, I brought up my phone. I'm like, I'm going to read my review of your film. And it was so exciting to see that thing on a massive screen. And again, I think it goes back to just emotionally, as a viewer, I connected to it. We'll connect to stories of all genres, all lengths, all sizes. If it's a little too long, again, you might ask yourself, okay, well, will we stay connected to it? Do you get to us sooner than later? I think a lot of times a big, successful, easy way to fix stories that might be a little long for short, start it a little bit later. Instead of it being the first time the characters meet, they already know each other. Sort of hit the ground running might be a suggestion I have, with the understanding sometimes hitting the ground running is a shot that might be a little bit abstract, a little bit oblique, but emotionally you get us quickly. You know, maybe don't make us wait too much to feel. Don't wait too long for your story to really get moving, I think would be a suggestion. And don't be afraid to be a little on the shorter side. But if it's longer, okay, just fill that space. Make sure you're using every ounce of that real estate, because someone's got to watch a lot of short films if they're looking at film festivals. And it's going to be with a lot of other short films. So what's going to enable it to have a good use of its own real estate so that it should be in that lineup, it should be in that block of films.
And like you said, make sure it, quote, plays well with others.
Yeah.
So if it's going to be in a slate of films
Yeah.
at HollyShorts or whatever, make sure that it kind of fits into the sort of time frame.
Yeah. And I will say, it's funny, over time, because I've been judging short films for a really long time now, the number of really good films we get just seems to increase.
Yeah.
So it makes the job harder. In a good way, and then it's like, oh my God, can we add another block of films? Because there's a lot of cool storytellers out there, and it's become so much more accessible. You know, even the 20 some odd years ago, I went to film school. You couldn't edit at home. I think I knew one guy who did. And the rest of us had to get 8 gig data dock drives that were like the size of a brick to edit our stuff on, you know? And now, of course, my son can edit his YouTube videos on his phone. And so a lot more people have access.
What are the biggest mistakes you see in short films?
The biggest mistakes might be taking too long to get that story moving. And when I say that, I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying there's one story that works, you know, like, and you got to read the hero's journey or else what's the point? Or was a hero with 1,000 faces? Like, the truth is, I think if I'm watching 5 minutes of a short and I feel like it hasn't started, I'm not going to push it through, you know. And even when I use that term, it hasn't started, it doesn't necessarily mean I know exactly what's going on yet, but gives me something to pull me in. But when I think plot at the expense of story is a mistake a lot of writers maybe fall into. But with a short film especially, when you just don't have much time, like plot is in essence what's happening, but story is like the emotion behind it. So it's like if you lay too much road down, too much setup, it's going to be hard to keep your audience engaged. And to go back to you got to play well with others. You got a bunch of other films. And that's a long block. 2 hours of short films, each one's got to really move. And it doesn't mean they have to be super fast cut. They can be languidly paced, as long as it's interesting, as long as it's emotionally, we can be invested in it. But I do find a lot of short films, I'm like, well, they're just setting up way too much. And there's a lot of exposition, and again, plot over story. And that's when I might not make it through the second half of the film. And not because I'm impatient necessarily, at least I don't think I am, but I think it's because I am trying to think about that audience. I am trying to think about watching this with 7 other short films. And how when you're in a screening room and or a theater and you have a film that isn't playing, you can tell. Right, everyone suddenly has a cough. Everyone's rustling in their seats. They're more interested in their popcorn. I'm almost like listening for that as I'm watching these films to make sure, as I'm judging these films. But again, I think sometimes it's also in editing. A lot of people know how to cut. Edit is a different beast. It's kind of like not everyone who can pick up a guitar can play a guitar solo. Not everyone's Eddie Van Halen, or John Mayer, I guess. Some people like him. No offense. But I think when you're in post on your film, making sure it moves. Also, sound design. Sound can be a much cheaper way to fix things. And if the sound is rough, that can really pull us out of a film. Sound design can also be like your inexpensive best friend in filmmaking, compared to, of course, what you need to get in front of the camera. And conversely, if you don't put the time and attention into sound design, it can make your film feel a lot less professional. And so I think it's making sure the music's right, making sure the sound is clean, that you can hear people. And let's say you didn't get the best on-set production sound, okay, just spend some time to really clean it up so it doesn't feel too, student-y, doesn't feel as professional. It can be, because student films can be incredibly professional. I've seen plenty. I focus a lot on the student films at Burbank's Film Festival. And, some of them I have to remind myself they're student films. You couldn't tell. But yeah, you don't want it to feel less than pro, because a lot of people can make their films really pro. It's about take the time to do it.
Do you think that's something that has actually gotten stronger, but now the story is lacking?
It can be, right? I know sometimes I get surprised when I see edits that don't feel as tight as they can be, because I'm like, these filmmakers have had these editing tools forever. But again, it's cutting versus editing. Editing takes a little bit more artistry. And so I think, you sometimes find that even though a lot of filmmakers have had these tools forever, it's really figuring out how to make them work. How to make your movie sort of sing, so to speak, make it fly.
So like a graceful dissolve versus just a hard cut.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking?
And sometimes the hard cut is exactly what you need, or a jagged cut. You know, sometimes the kind of like non-linear edit is exactly what we need. But then other times it's like, okay, why is it this way? You know, I always go back to music. And so it's like, well, if it's a symphony, what's this part? What's this part of the larger piece, you know, this chapter, if you will, this movement. And, you know, I think also too what helps with edit is character point of view. It doesn't mean it has to be first person like a found footage horror movie, but the idea of emotionally, who's this happening to? Who's the character we most connect with, and allow the edit to kind of come out of that. That can be a really good way to sort of tighten your storytelling.